watching online. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Julio, and I'm on staff here as the kids director here at the Block Church. And what that means, it's joy and privilege for me to oversee the Block Kids ministry across all of our locations here in the city of Philadelphia. And if you're a parent here this morning, it is an honor and a privilege to serve your children. Thank you for trusting us with them. I am working my best to make it the most memorable and exciting time for them. My passion and my hope is that your children, that they would grow up to be men and women who are passionate about building God's house. So thank you so much for your investment and for your trust here in this church. A little bit behind my context here at the Block, I've been at the Block since the summer of 2014, which for some of you who know, that was before even the church officially launched to be what it is today. And I walked into this church as a young 15-year-old. I think I was 14 at the time, actually. And I served weekly after we launched on the ushers, parking, and security team. Eventually, when I turned 16, someone had a wild idea. I don't know if it was Pastor Joey or Pastor Grace, for me to become a service lead. So here I was at 16, leading a group of 10 to 15 men who were 2-3 times my age. And it was just an incredible opportunity for me to learn more about how to be a leader, how to be a steward of what God has given us. And so if you have teenagers, this is also a safe place for them to grow up in the house of God and be developed. Later, I graduated high school through this church. The church saw me through many seasons of my life. I ended up going to college. I got a full-ride scholarship to my dream school where I pursued my dreams to be a nurse, which is awesome. It's amazing. We can give God praise for that. But what I hadn't realized was that I was pursuing my own dreams, and the more that I pursued that, the more God reminded me of his calling, which was a lot different than what I had. And so this past spring semester, I withdrew from school. I left a $250,000 academic scholarship, and I went into full-time ministry with no prospect of a job, no prospect of where to eat, no prospect of where to live, anything. I just left it all, and I got to be on staff here. And so in August, I started on staff, and like I said, I love serving the kids of this church, but long story short, what I want to say is that I'm a product of this house. What happened at the Block Church, what God's doing in the midst of this, I consider myself the product of it. Everything I am today is because of this church, because of the leaders, because of Pastor Joey and his dedication, because of people like Pastor Grace. So I'd never want to lose sight ever of how grateful I am for what God has done in my life through this church. However, I realize that that's such a tendency that we have, that sometimes we get so caught up in the detail. Maybe I can get caught up on a small time the church kind of missed a moment from my life. We can get kind of caught up in those things, and we forget the beauty of what God has actually done in our lives. And this week, as I was preparing for this sermon, interestingly enough, I read this article from the Washington Post, and they did an experiment where they got this guy. His name is Joshua Bell. He's a prodigy violinist from the young age, one of the best violinists in the entire world. And they came up to him and said, hey, we would love to do an experiment, and we would love to have you play your violin in one of the most busiest parts of Washington, D.C. And we want to notice that if people walk by, would they notice the beauty of the music that you play? And so, interestingly enough, Joshua Bell, he was like, yeah, sure, let's do this. Now, let me remind you that even the worst seats in the concert halls sell out for hundreds of dollars for this guy. So this guy plays beautifully. I mean, perfectly. He's one of the best musicians of our time. And so they put him in the midst of the DC metro area. And so what they do is he plays, and I'm not surprised that no one ended up recognizing who he was. I mean, this guy's playing one of the most beautiful, most melodic music that you can ever imagine. And people are walking past him as if he's just another homeless person playing a violin. And interestingly enough, it reminds me of someone in the Bible, someone that we call Jesus, who came into this world in such a undercover way, in a way that people didn't expect it. The Jewish people, they had been expecting a king who was going to come and be rich and liberate them from the rule of the oppressors. They expected a king who was going to come with political prowess, with economical force and power. And here they are. It was a baby born in a manger, and and the people passing by, I can imagine people walking past Mary as she was on a donkey on her way to give birth to the Savior of the world, just passing by it, not knowing that inside of that womb was somebody who was going to save them, who was going to deliver them, who was going to give them peace, who was going to give them love, and they ended up missing out on it. And it's just it's the nature of us as humans. And so today, what I really want us to focus in on is not missing who God is in this Christmas season. Because it can be so easy for us to lose sight of it. In the busyness of everything being commercialized, and who did I get Christmas presents for? Who did I get this for? Who did I get that for? Trying to figure out work schedules. Can I get off on the holiday season? All of those things. It's so easy for us to miss what God might have for us. And so today, the point of this sermon is for you to really see who Jesus is. And so today I want you to take away to know that may we never be too busy, too distracted, or too callous to notice the beauty of our Savior and the glorious work on display, both in our lives and in the lives of our community. And I don't want us to miss out on the significance of the birth of Jesus. The prophet Isaiah said in chapter 7, verse 14, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel." And I get to what that means in a little bit. But hundreds of years prior to the arrival of Jesus, the prophet Isaiah, he makes this declaration. And in the New Testament, we see in Matthew chapter 1, as he's introducing and starting to write out the Christmas story as we know it today, he ends up saying, "Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. And that's the entire point of this sermon. God is with us, or God with us. That's the entire point of this sermon, because what I want to show you is that God is with you a lot more often than you think that he's not. Now, whether you profess faith in Jesus or you're still figuring this thing out, I just want you to know that God is still with you. He still has a plan for you. He's not through with you, whether you believe in it or not. There's still a plan there. And so today, really, what I want you to do is the title of my sermon, I want you to ponder 3 different questions. The title of my sermon this morning is, "Do you see what I see?" Do you see what I see? When I see the Christmas story, I see an opportunity for 3 different questions for you to ask yourself. And the first question that I want you to ask this morning is, do you see how God is with you? In no other religion does God come to save man. Traditionally, man has gone to God to save himself. But Christmas is about the opposite. It's about God coming to man in both spirit and in flesh. This is the gospel. God gladly comes to man no matter the state or status of his creation's situation. And so on Christmas, we celebrate something quite wonderful. It's God entering, removing himself from the eternal into the temporal, removing himself from the infinite to the finite. It's the word that created all things become flesh. And this within itself is the incarnation. And we believe that God, this is truly the essence of the gospel, that God removed himself from the throne of heaven and came in flesh to experience and understand every single thing that we've been going through in this earth. And so, interestingly enough, he does all of this without compromising himself. He's still himself. He's still 100% God, 100% man. The Bible tells us that in several ways was he tempted. In several ways, we see Jesus who wept for his friend. We see Jesus who sat and had dinner with sinners, with prostitutes, with people with disabilities. Jesus was in the midst of all of those things. But when we get caught up in the Christmas spirit and in the culture of Christmas, it's so easy for us to forget that Jesus is with us. And so I remember this one time, before I share this story, I want to share this quote by Frederick Buechner, and it really sets up what I'm about to tell you. It says, "The incarnation is a kind of vast joke whereby the creator of the ends of the earth comes among us in diapers. And until we too have taken the idea of the God-man seriously enough to be scandalized by it, we have not taken it as seriously as it demands." And so the reality is that if the idea that Jesus was Emmanuel, God with us, if that idea doesn't permeate the soul of our being, that we are so confident that he is with us in the midst of everything, we lose the point of Christmas, and we lose actually the entire point of Jesus coming to earth. Because if we in a moment of trial and of temptation, if we forget what Jesus actually did, then what was the point of him actually coming? If we go through Christmas without actually believing that God is with us in the midst of all this busyness, then what's the point of Christmas? And I want to share this story. I remember it was a year after I got saved. I remember we just had gotten out of Christmas break from school. So we were starting Christmas break. And so I run home from school, and I get home. I throw my bag on the couch, and I get home, and I go to flick on the light, and the light doesn't come on. So I'm like, this is weird. So I go and I use my flashlight. I get to the kitchen to get some water, a cup of water with my flashlight, and the water doesn't come on. I mean, the Christmas season was starting, and here I was in a situation where my house didn't either have heat, it didn't have water, and it didn't have electricity right before the start of the Christmas season. And I remember I was so frustrated with God. I'm like, God, I gave my life to you. I go to church every single week. I give consistently. How can you do this to me? How can you abandon me? But I had two options in the midst of that frustration that I had with God. Either I can press into God, or I can go to bed bitter, and that was going to set the entire precedent for my Christmas experience. And so what I did was I wrapped myself in 10 blankets because it was cold. I wrapped myself in about 10 blankets, and I remember I was so frustrated with God, and God said, would you press into me? Would you remember that I'm still with you? And so what I did was I went and I grabbed 3 candles, and I lit them up on the side of my bed. And I remember, cold as ever, still frustrated with God. I'm grabbing these candles, I almost break them. I'm almost about to set the whole house on fire. I'm like, God, I'm so frustrated. And so I grabbed the candles, I turned them on, and guess I crack open my Bible, and I get as close to the candles as possible so that I can see the words of Jesus. And as I realized this, that God is with me, I read the New Testament. I feel like I read the Gospels like 4 times because I was so frustrated with God. And I'm like, God, I'm going to keep reading this Bible until I'm not frustrated anymore, and I actually believe that you're here with me. And as I kept reading the Gospels, I'm reminded that even though I don't have earthly light right now, there's a light inside of me that there's no shadow that it won't light up. There's no light that it won't witness to the darkest of people. Even though I didn't have water, I read about the women at the well. You shall thirst no longer. I remember that I had no heat, but God reminded me, I'm going to light a passion and a fire in you for the gospel that no one can contain it. And so we get so caught up in Christmas that we forget what it's all about. It's about God being with us regardless of what circumstance or what situation we're going through. May we never lose the wonder and the scandalous nature of the incarnation. May we never forget that God is not only with us now, but till the end of ages. Matthew 28:20 says, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of age. Do you see what I see? Do you see that God is with you? This points me to my second question that I want to ask you this morning. Do you see how God is with us? The coming of Jesus changed the entire trajectory of humanity. He would bring people together and ruin religiosity as they knew it. Jesus, he would bring tax collector and criminals on a journey. He would bring prostitutes and homeless to his table. He would dismiss and disrupt the religious folks by throwing tables, and he would rebuke the arrogant. Jesus didn't just come for you, he came for us. And we have to remember that we aren't entitled to his salvation, but we are gifted his grace and his mercy, and as an undeserving community of broken people. And so through the incarnation, what ends up happening is that God invites Mary and Joseph, just a couple of nobodies. You might feel that way. That's how I felt. I'm just a nobody from Kensington and Somerset that God's going to use. And God called me, and he saw me. And I don't know how you feel this morning, but God is with you. He has a plan for you. So Pastor Mark Driscoll, he puts it like this. He says, I'm just a nobody trying to tell everybody about somebody. And that's what Mary and Joseph did. That was the adventure that they were invited into. And so the best way to notice that God is working is to be fully present in community. It's to be fully present and engaged with Jesus, that in no other way can we see that we can live without community. As I was preparing for this sermon, the Lord really spoke to me. We've coined this term, the year of overflow. And what that means is that we're believing for a tidal wave of God's goodness and His mercy and His favor upon our life. And He told me, He said, it might be possible that people are waiting for the overflow to fall from the sky. But in reality, what God is calling us to do is for us to dig a deep well down and get rooted long enough so that something might spring up. And the difference between the two, the first one falling from the sky, it's easy. We don't deserve it. But the second one, you got to put blood, sweat, and tears into it. There's going to be people who are going to let you down in community. In this church, we do I'm sorry. We do next time I'm going to do better. In this church, we're a place of unity, in a place where you can come together and be vulnerable. And I can't think of a better place to do this than in block groups. Sometimes I don't understand why more people aren't in block groups. We should have 100% attendance of these people in this church going to small groups, being vulnerable, because it's as we continue day in and day out, semester after semester, digging deep-rooted issues within ourselves that we then realize that God is with us. See, because the reality is that Jesus died for two types of relationships. He died for a vertical relationship between you and God, but sometimes we forget that He also died for a horizontal relationship between us and each other. And so what God wants us to invite into is for us to experience that deep sense of community. And it's going to take hard work. I mean, my block groups, God has revealed so much in my through my experience with block groups. Growing up, I had no respect for authority, no respect for men in my life. Literally, Pastor Joey would correct me, and I'm like, dude, I grew up without a dad. I don't need you to be talking to me this way. But it was in block groups with vulnerable people that I was able to talk and be like, hey, man, I think I need to start trusting more men in my life. Maybe I should let a godly man speak into my life, speak into my future, speak into my finances, speak into my relationships. Maybe it's time for me to let God have it all through community. And sometimes that's all it takes. Do you see what I see? Do you see that God is amongst His people in community and in care? And that's really what I want you to take out from this second point. So for many of us, so God comes to us in the form of a baby through another human and shows us the following, that Jesus, that following Jesus or being a Christian is about recovering our true identity and also about a true humanity through community. Matthew 18:20 says this, for where there are two or more gathered as my followers, I am among them. And in reality, so many times we're gathered as two or three as believers, but we miss out on what God has for us in community. We forget to press in and to lean into what God actually wants to do in and through our lives. And so I'm just going to give you a couple tangibles for you to not miss God amongst community. Many missed the Messiah because they were too busy, so I'm going to ask you this holiday season to slow down. You need to have an active prayer and worship life, some personal devotion time with God. So for some of you, it's time to fast social media during this time because you get so caught up looking at other people's blessings that you miss out on what God's doing through you and your community. Some of you need to put your phone down. Man, I've been so convicted since the new Apple update. It tells you everything. It tells you how much time you spend on your phone, not only per day but per week. And I remember one week, it was like 40 hours of the week I was on my phone. I had a full-time job on Instagram. It was so bad. It was so bad. Oh, and God spoke to me. He was like, man, you need to do better than that. And so, but I wonder what would happen if I put it down and I actually pursued God during this Christmas season. If I'm not so focused on what's happening on my neighbors, if I'm not so focused on how God's pulling through for them, but I actually seek and see, God, what is your will for me this Christmas season? What do you want me to do? How can I give to you sacrificially? How can I give back to you everything that you've given me? And if you're here this morning and you're asking that question, you're in a good place because I got this third question for you. Do you see how God is with them? So I quote unquote them, them over there. Do you see how God is with them? And what them represents your enemies. Not just your neighbor, not just your brother, not just the person you sit next to in church, or the greeter that greets you as you come in, or the person that hands you coffee as you come into the sanctuary. But it's about them, the person that is completely against you. the person who has nothing in common with you? Do you see how God is with them? Because the reality is that God is working in your life just as much as he's working in your enemy's life. That's just the reality of it. And some of us, we get so caught up and we get so mad. But we need to realize that God is actually with them. And Jesus, there was this king named Herod. Because the Jewish people, they were so caught up. They were expecting a great king to rescue them and to save them and to become the new king, a new emperor of this nation. And so the Jewish community, they were expecting them. And so when they heard, hey, I think the Messiah has been born, King Herod, who was a king at the time, let me read this to you in Matthew 2:16, 17. It says, then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. He had sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had been asserted from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. So King Herod, upon learning that Jesus, the Savior and the Messiah of the world, had been born, he sent out to have every single kid under 2 killed. But the reality is, and the beauty of this story, is that Jesus came to die for you just as much as he came to die for the soldiers that went to persecute him. Just as much as he went to die for the people who would go then and murder him on the cross. And so Jesus still came for every single one of them, even for those in your life who are enemies, who give you a hard time, who have hurt you, who have attacked you, who have ridiculed you and failed you. Yes, Jesus died and called them as well. And so the title of my sermon is called, Do You See What I See? And I want to share this quick story about the actual song that was written. It says, the song is called, Do You Hear What I Hear? I know some of you have heard it on commercials. Do you hear what I hear? This is why I'm preaching and on the block worship. So it was written in October of 1962. It was at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis when Russia was aiming missiles at Florida from Cuba. Regni, which was one of the writers, was inspired to write this lyrics, quote, said the night wind to the little lamb, do you see what I see? Pray for peace, people everywhere. And he wrote these lyrics right after watching little babies being pushed on strollers in New York City. And he had become so perplexed with the idea that these children could have been at hurt, that our nation could have been under great danger. And so another writer named Shane, he reports in an interview years later that neither him nor Regni could sing the full song by themselves because of the emotions surrounding the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said, our little song broke us up. You must realize that there was a great threat of nuclear war at the time. And the song and why they wrote it, it really made me think. These writers were saddened by the thought of children being under danger due to war. They were making a statement to all of the enemies and to all the nations. They're saying, do you see what I see? Do you hear what I hear? It has seemed that people were getting so flustered with what was happening in the world that they forgot to see that their nation was in great danger. And so I would venture to say this morning, it's not just about do you see what I see or do you hear what I hear, but it's do you see what Jesus sees? Do you hear what Jesus hears? Do you see that Jesus is calling all his people from every nation, from every tongue, whether friend or enemy, back to his kingdom? And it just might take you. It might take you coming up this Christmas season, really honing down on these 3 questions that I asked you. Can I see that God is with me? Can I see that God is in work in the midst of my community? And can I see that God is with them? Because the reality is that if you see that God is with you, and if you see that God is with your community, how could you not then be compelled to see that God is with them as well? How can you deny people access to the good news of Jesus, to the forgiveness that you have encountered in the power of Christ? And so this Christmas season, I really want you to confront your them. Who is the person that God is stirring up in your heart as I'm speaking right now? Who's the person that you need to reconcile with? I don't know who it is for you, but I remember for me when I first got saved, man, my dad abandoned me when I was 6 months old. as most vulnerable as I can be. He left me with my mother. She was 16 years old. She had to fend for herself to raise me. And the first thing I remember when I experienced forgiveness from Christ, God said, go and forgive your father. And so I went to my father, and I came to him after 16 years of not speaking to this man. And I say, man, I don't know your story. I barely know your name. I only know your name because you have the same one as me. I don't know who you are. I don't know what mess you got caught up in when I was born. But man, I just want to tell you that I love you, that I have love for you. I forgive you. I'm not mad at you. I'm not pointing a finger at you. I'm here to hug you and to embrace you. Let's start this thing over. Let's have some hope for the future. Man, let me tell you about Jesus. Let me tell you about the forgiveness that I experienced. Let me tell you what he did on the cross. And to my dismay, he was so uncomfortable with the idea that I could forgive him. He was so uncomfortable that he pushed me away even more. As I continue to tell him, man, I love you, I forgive you, man. Like, I don't care what you did, I'm here for you. But the reality is that I'm not responsible for how he responds to the way I treat him. What I'm responsible for is year after year, I'm like, Dad, I love you. This is the year that we're going to be reconciled. This is the year where your shame is going to fall. This is the year where your chains are going to break. This is the year where we're going to experience overflow. And I'm responsible for loving him. And that's all I'm responsible for, not how he's going to respond. And so what I want to remind us this morning is that the spirit of Christmas, really what it's all about, it's about hope. See, the spirit of Christmas, it's about new life. The spirit of Christmas is about redemption. The spirit of Christmas is about second chances. The spirit of Christmas is about love. Man, I wish somebody got excited. The spirit of Christmas is about humility and extending forgiveness to everyone in need. So I would challenge you, who do you need to reconcile with? Who do you need to bring hope to? Who do you need to bring new life to? Who do you need to bring redemption to? Let's bring second chances to them. Let's bring love to them. Let's bring humility to them. Let's bring them prosperity to them. Let's bring joy to them. Let's bring love to them. Let's give them the hope that Jesus has given us. Come on, everyone around this room, let's stand to our feet this morning. I know God is stirring up in your heart who to reconcile with.